Agenda item 1, the Pledge of Allegiance. Trustee Villarreal, will you lead us in the pledge, please?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next on our agenda is the swearing in of the student trustee. Board Clerk Dennis Jordan will now ask Ms. Lemus to step up front.
You will raise your right hand and you will repeat after me. I state your name.
Alexis Lemus.
Do solemnly affirm
Do solemnly affirm
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the State of California
the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies,
against all enemies,
foreign and domestic.
foreign and domestic.
That I will bear true faith
That I will bear true faith
and allegiance
and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States
to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California.
and the Constitution of the State of California.
That I take this obligation freely,
That I take this obligation freely,
without any mental reservation
without any mental reservation
or purpose of evasion,
or purpose of evasion.
and that I will well and faithfully discharge
That I will well and faithfully discharge
the duties upon which I am about to enter.
the duties of which I am upon.
You did really great. Congratulations.
All right, welcome, Trustee Lemus. Next on our agenda is item number 2, hearing of the public. Is there anyone present wishing to speak on any item that is not on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to item number 3, additions and or changes to the agenda. President Vitale?
There are none.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to 4 constituent reports. We're going to start with Academic Senate. Welcome, Julie.
Welcome. Well, so while it's summer vacation for most, there's still lots of faculty things going on. A bunch of us are still a part of the Strategic Enrollment Management Committee that's been working with our new VPI, soon Kelly Fowler, and working on starting getting that movement going at our college. We've been in the process of hiring several positions because of the vacancies. And so there's still lots of things faculty are going on. Just because it's summer, we're not doing nothing. It's not as busy, but there's still things going on.
Well, thank you very much for that report. Next, Merced College Faculty Association.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
There has not been a coup d'etat. Patrick's still president of the association, but he's cruising somewhere. So I thought I would come and introduce myself. I think everyone here knows me. It's Rich Randall. I've been the lead negotiator for a decade or so, and now I'm going to move into different waters. We'll see how that works. So you'll be seeing my face the next couple of years. I just wanted to say hello and that I'll be working with you. I'm really looking forward to it very much. So thank you.
All right. Well, we're glad to have you. All right. Next, we have Classified Senate.
Good afternoon. Classified Senate has elected our 2018-2019 officers. I will be continuing as president. Gabriela Garcia will be continuing as vice president. Jason Hanforth will be serving as our secretary, and Maria Soto will continue as our treasurer. Tomorrow, another classified professional and myself will be going down to Ventura for the State Classified Senate Classified Leadership Institute. We're looking forward to bringing back a lot of good information.
Good. Well, thank you for serving on those, and wish you a safe trip. Next, we have CSEA.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I would like to publicly thank
those that came out to help serve for breakfast and the lunch on our CSEA week. Very good, pretty good turnout. And everybody seemed to have a good time, which was good. Relax a little bit. And things are in full swing with the summer, 10-hour days. And so that's good. Get Fridays off. And I think that's about it for now. I have nothing else to bring forth. Thank you.
Good, well, thank you very much. All right, next we will go to the Police Officers Association. There's no report. Management Association, no report. Associated Students of Merced College. Here. Oh, go ahead.
Well, just to say that since it is summer session, we are out of session, but we are still working in our office to provide our food pantry services, and we are also planning our summer retreat that will be held in August in Las Vegas. And my report.
All right, well, thank you for that update on behalf of the ASMC. We'll move on to agenda item 5, consideration of the consent agenda. What is the pleasure of the board?
I move we approve. Second.
Okay, we have a motion by trustee Gutierrez and a second by trustee Villarreal. Any discussion from the dais? Any comments from the public? Seeing none, call for the vote. Trustee Lemus, how do you vote?
Aye.
Thank you. And yes, motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 6A, start time for July 10th, 2018 board meeting. Propose that it start at 1 o'clock. Any, what is the pleasure of the board?
I can't be here.
Okay, we have a motion by trustee Lashbrook. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion by trustee Lashbrook, a second by trustee Ochoa. Any further discussion from the dais? Any comments from the public? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. Trustee Lemus, how do you vote?
Nay.
Thank you.
Did you want to discuss this?
Most of the reason why I say nay is because I am in summer school session, as well as most other students, that I feel like would be a disadvantage if we start the meetings at 1 on July.
I'm going to probably have to vote nay also.
Well, okay.
Discuss it. I just set up a dentist all day. I set one up in the morning and early afternoon, so I could make it at 4. I wouldn't be able to get it done.
What was our purpose? I mean,
You all actually discussed this, I believe, in the last meeting, because you used to cancel the July meeting, but we found out per ed code you can't cancel July meetings. And so the thought is there won't be a whole lot of business. And it'd be a pretty truncated meeting. So it really is your pleasure, though. We're here regardless.
So long as there is a quorum, we're okay with it, right?
Yeah.
It shouldn't be a heavy agenda anyway, so if you have to miss, you have to miss. Okay.
Okay, well, the vote is before you, so please cast your vote. Okay, so okay, so motion fails. So all right, so meeting will be at 4 o'clock. All right. Agenda item B, second reading and approval of board policies.
This is the second reading of the board policy in compliance with the league recommendations on workplace violence plan. It's recommended you approve.
I move that we approve.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by trustee Jordan, a second by trustee Villarreal. Any discussion by anyone on the dais? Okay, seeing none, I'll ask for comments from the public. Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. Trustee Lemus, how do you vote?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Agenda item C, educational master plan document. President Vitale.
You all voted on the goals and objectives. This is an acceptance of the actual document that we'll now put into print. And this is all the data that was presented to you basically in the PowerPoint to the constituents. It explains the process and then it embeds, of course, the goals and objectives. And wanted to formally bring the document as one document to you all for acceptance. And then we'll have print services work on making it nice and pretty, if you will, and then we'll get it out to the community.
What is the pleasure of the board?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, we have a motion by trustee Villarreal. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by trustee Ochoa. Is there any discussion by members of the board? Okay, seeing none, I'll ask for comments from members of the public. Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. Trustee Lemus, how do you vote?
Aye.
Thank you.
Stacy, my computer said there was an error with voting. Is there, can you bring it up again?
Okay, motion carries unanimously. Thank you. And congratulations, President Vitale. It's a good-looking document. It's going to have a good path for us. Okay, agenda item D, change voting member on the GAEN Consortium Board.
You know, with the departure of one of our deans, we need to have a new voting member for the adult consortium, which is our local consortium. I have requested for Jessica Moran to step into an acting role, and it's a part of a larger reorg action item later, but this actually makes her a voting member on the consortium, which is important for us to have that. So.
I move we approve.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by trustee Jordan and a second by trustee Gutierrez. Any discussion by members of the board? Seeing none, I'll ask for comments from members of the public. Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. Trustee Lemus, how do you vote?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Next, agenda item D, financial aid, California Promise, and federal loan programs. President Vitale.
Yeah, as a part of Assembly Bill 19, the College Promise Program, all new students within the community college system in California that are first time and full time will be free their first year. As a part of that, we have to participate in the federal loan program. and this requires approval from the board to participate in it. We have not since the 1990s, and that's because of numerous reasons, but mainly because if we go into default, then we could lose financial aid for all of our students. So we're going to have to monitor that closely. Dr. McCandless and his team have been thinking through how we will make sure that we prevent that from happening. I'm sure it will be fine, but this is a regulatory compliance issue, and it's something that we need to do to move forward.
All right, well, I appreciate the vigilance. I think that given the seriousness of what could happen if this goes sideways, I think that I'd like to ask the president to keep us updated at least at every other meeting, or some frequency that makes sense, just so that we make sure that this doesn't get away from us.
Possibly maybe an annual, because we know annually, and this would take years to get into default. So you want to monitor it, on a 5-year scale, but annually we'll take a look at where we're at with the default rate. But it would be about a year before we know if we even have any defaults, or a little more actually. So do you want to add something to it?
Yeah, just the only thing is that there are a number of colleges that are in the same spot we are, and so one of the things is the default prevention that's available, and it's it's much easier to appeal this now and to get put on a program even if your default rate gets to the danger zone. So they're making it a much more proactive process.
Okay, well, I appreciate, and with an eye to that, what is the pleasure of the board? Oops, okay.
They say they're going to use free consulting services. Is there any teeth in it so that people actually pay back the money of the loans? None. So we're going to be in the same position we were before.
Yeah, this doesn't guarantee. This doesn't. Yeah, I mean, we put holds on students' records, but there's nothing we can do to make them pay, and that's always been the crux of participating in the federal loan program. You can lose your federal loan and financial aid, even though we have no control over students paying. But there are best practices. We'll follow those. At the end of the day, there are several single college districts who are concerned, much like we are, for the participation, and we'll keep a very vigilant eye on this program. We'll make sure that we are doing everything we can to stay on top of it, but there's nothing we can do, and we certainly don't want to not participate in the College Promise program because it is free tuition. So my only hope is that 4 to 5 years from now, if this does become a huge concern among other colleges like ours, they will relax the language of Assembly Bill 19, but we have to kind of dive in head first and hope for the best.
Are there things we can do to steer students away from starting their debt load at this level? I mean, we've got a lot of programs and...
Yeah, financial literacy is certainly something that is top of mind. Our financial aid department does have a financial literacy workshop. We provide those through the student success workshops. We provide them through financial aid advising to make sure they know, and there's a requirement before you get a loan that you have to go through orientation on what student debt is and the concerns with that and the importance of repayment. So we do everything we can to educate. At the end of the day, there are districts that this does creep up on them, and we'll just have to keep a very close eye on it and implement as many best practices as possible and monitor as we go.
Is this putting an extra heavy load on staff, a new one, or is
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I mean, our financial aid department is not necessarily happy about this new regulation, but they also recognize that this is an opportunity for students who can't pass. But yeah, you're spot on your questioning. They're to say the least. I don't think Tracy's here, but Mike is smiling. He knows. To say the least, this is going to add another layer, and it's also going to add a layer to admin services. So across the board, it's not the best news, but we'll make lemonade out of it. But your questions are spot on.
Okay, all right. Any further discussion? Okay. Having considered the aforementioned, what is the pleasure of the board?
I so move to approve.
My second.
Okay, we have a motion by trustee Ochoa, second by trustee Lashbrook. Any further discussion by members of the board? Seeing none, are there comments from members of the public? All right, seeing none, I'll call for the vote. Trustee Lemus, how do you vote?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries 6 yea and 1 nay. Motion passes. Moving on to agenda item F, proposed 2018-2019 tentative budget. Mr. Allison.
Good afternoon, board. And so today we're presenting the district's tentative budget, which will serve as our operating budget effective July 1 with our new fiscal year. And we are, this will be in place until we bring the final budget to you in September. And so what we'll be talking about today is just our timeline, where we've been, where we are now, and where we're going, as well as the current status of the state budget, looking at legislative budget actions, as well as the new funding formula. And then we'll talk about our revenue and expenditure assumptions and where that will put our reserve fund balance. So looking at where we've been, the governor comes out with his January budget proposal, and we start to develop our budget assumptions based on his proposal. And as changes are brought forth between January and the governor's May revision, we also start to develop additional information based on information that comes to us in the interim. And then we also sit down and meet with departmental budget managers to discuss a variety of items, looking at potential budget savings within their department, making sure that their ongoing needs are being met, and trying to support their programs, make sure that their program review outcomes are being met and addressed as well. And as I mentioned, this is the tentative budget is the district's operating budget beginning July 1. We move forward with closing our books after June 30. So the months of July and August, our staff are working pretty hard to get our books closed so that we know what our ending balance is for the current fiscal year. And then we take our final budget proposal to Budget Committee in August and subsequently bring that forward to the board for final approval. And so again, knowing that this is a tentative budget, it is definitely subject to change based on the state's final budget that they adopt. And when we put this presentation together last week, some decisions had not been made that have now been made at the state level. The governor has still not signed off on the budget, but for all intents and purposes, the budget is in place, has been agreed to. And so some of the information that you'll see that we present tonight has already changed. The decisions were made on Friday when we received an email kind of spelling out some of the information that had been further defined and decided upon, that we didn't have that information prior to putting this together. And so where are we going? The state is going to pass the final budget within the next few weeks. The governor will sign off. There could be some trailer bill language that could impact us, and so we'll have to see the impact of that. Again, mentioned that we'll close our books sometime in August. We'll complete our fourth quarter reports and our annual expenditure report. And then as part of the final budget process, we'll look at adding our resource allocation request any planned expenditures that come from the President and Cabinet, as well as any budget augmentations that might be approved that departments submit. And then we'll update our revenue and expenditure assumptions as well, in addition to our reserves, based on the information that we have. And then we'll propose the district's final budget again in September, in August to the Budget Committee, and then in September to the board. And so this is where some of the information that we had when we completed this presentation is now changed, or decisions were ultimately made. And so one of the actions that you've heard quite a bit about is the new funding formula. And the governor had come out with the new funding formula in January when he submitted his initial proposal. Then there were some changes that were incorporated based on input from the Chancellor's office as well as districts throughout the state. Then both the Senate and Assembly rejected the formulas. Subsequent to that, there's a conference committee between the two houses that get together. They consult with the governor, and ultimately they came up with, they decided that part of the proposal would include a new funding formula. So it has been decided to incorporate a new funding formula for community colleges. And so since that just came about on Friday, we're still in the process of crunching our numbers to see what is that going to mean for us here locally. And we'll talk a little bit more about the components of the new formula. Andre Arquitas will speak a little bit more detail on that. And just to highlight a couple of items that was included in the May revision, where there were some differences between the governor's proposal and then the Senate and Assembly. One of the more significant ones for us was our deferred maintenance or scheduled maintenance and state instructional equipment. So the governor's initial proposal was over $270 million. Then the May revision, that was reduced quite a bit, and the Senate approved the governor's May revision. The Assembly actually increased that amount over and above the governor. What was ultimately decided upon is to reduce it even further down to about a little over 28 million system-wide. And so that is a significant reduction as far as the amount of scheduled maintenance money that we'll receive here on campus. And so that could be roughly about $225,000 to us, which doesn't amount to much for the amount of scheduled maintenance projects that we have, in addition to the needs for instructional equipment. So that was somewhat disappointing to see, but scheduled maintenance money is usually the first funds that are reduced in order to increase funds elsewhere. I also just wanted to talk about the categorical program consolidation, consolidating triple SP, basic skills and student equity. That was approved, that was proposed by the governor and approved by both houses. So there would be no changes to that proposal. And it should be adopted as presented. The online education, the online college, quite a bit of controversy surrounding that proposal. It is being submitted as to accept the online college with $100 million one-time dollars, $20 million in ongoing money, as well as $35 million for online education. And you see it says $44 million up there, but that was another one of the changes. So it essentially went with the Senate's version and just reduced the amount for the online education initiative. On the capital outlay, the governor's proposal of 6 projects and 15 continuing projects is what was actually accepted. And being proposed as part of the final budget. And you see that the Senate and Assembly both increased that number, but ultimately they decided on the lower number of projects. And you heard the president talk about the College Promise program, proposed at $46 million, and that remained, and so that's what ultimately is being proposed, is $46 million for that program. So Andre will talk a little bit more about the specifics of the new funding formula.
Good afternoon, Board. So we've talked about this a little bit already in a few forums, and just to kind of highlight the proposal at this point in time. So when the governor initially introduced the new funding formula, it was a 50-25-25. In the May revised, the 60-20-20 was introduced with some changes. And so that's kind of where it's been positioned. I understand the language we see coming through is a 3-year sort of initiative now that's going to shift that from I think a 70-20, 2010 to and then ultimately to graduate us by the 3rd year into this ultimate 60-20-20. The components for the funding formula allow for a 3-year average, which allows some sort of spreading, so you can see at least the impacts of 1 year won't be felt in a single year. And I think there's actually new language that allows for some stability in that process, so you're not losing any funding from 1 year if there is some decline in your FTSs. So that's coming out in what's being considered for the budget now. So the stability piece that's mentioned here is actually going to change a little bit. Also, the summer shift that was being proposed as part of this was sort of ending where you can place your summer units. I think that also is being considered and doing away with and allowing us still the flexibility to utilize those summer hours.
Let me say just a word about that to the board. This is at the retreat, you'll recall, that was a big game changer for us, not being able to decide where those FTS go. They were saying that we were going to have to push every year. The summer FTS was going to have to be pushed to the next year. They've backed off on that. That's a big win for us, because on any given year you may have stronger enrollments earlier in the year or not. It's hard to say, and a lot of it is related to the economy. And so that's a huge plus for us as a part of this. We still have that flexibility to push or pull the FTS.
Thank you, President. And so the other component with that was also the hold harmless process, which is still embedded now. But their intent is to maintain at least a growth rate. We are at 2.71 this year. So basically, to maintain that growth into the new formula now, which before they were not going to do that. It was a single year growth, and then of our growth, and then there basically was going to say after that, really you're on your own. So thankfully, we've seen a change in kind of what's ultimately going, and we'll see more of that again in our final budget. The 20%, the supplemental grant, and the definement for that was going to be Pell Grant recipients and Promise Grant recipient, which is the new title for that for our old BOG grant, but it was only for those that were recipients over 25, and that has changed now as well. And what's been going to the governor, that's opened up quite a bit, and then includes Dreamers as well. And then finally, the 20% success component, which is really our completers. And so it's looking at all the various different degrees and certificates and otherwise, measuring those. And then the additional component to those completers is they were looking at low income and first generation and living wage earners. So those that have earned a living wage past the first year after receiving their completion, whether or not they're earning job wages that are worthwhile. So those were really bonus components to it, and those are still there. The thing that's changed, that's what's going to the governor now, is the low income, which was used. They used the same component for the Promise Grant over 25. That's changed as well. So you'll see this should change the formula, at least for us, going forward. And that's sort of where we're at right now for the formula. Now let me go to the next screen. There we go. So what we have built in the tentative for your review today is these assumptions. And so we looked at cost of living that's built into what the governor proposed at 2.71, which for us is about 1.4 million. We estimate apportionment base increase about 250 million system-wide, which for us is about $2 million. The district's base funding was reduced by 1.3. Remember, we have been as a mid-sized college for the last few years, so we're not reaching that 10,000 required FTS. And so by reducing that and going back to a small college level, that reduces our funding by 1.3 million. That's built into this year's budget. There is
Let me say something about that too, Andre.
Go ahead,
this is something we hear often. This is a question we have often, and because we were in restoration, we were held harmless for that 10,000 FTS, and for a while the state actually backed off of it because so many colleges were in this situation. Our base is 9,754 from 4 years ago, basically, when we went into stability and now into restoration. And so we have to build back up to base to be funded at that level. This is merely an assumption. So what I don't want is for this district to assume that we're going to be a 10,000 FTS district in 1 year's time. I think that's unfair to the Office of Instruction. It puts undue pressure on a new VPI. The goal is to build back up to that. It could be next year. It's highly unlikely. But a 3 to 4 year plan, I think, is very likely. And with good strategic planning, in fact, I'll give you a report on enrollments later, but we're up for next year already. And so that's good news. But I don't want that to be, and I did announce this in a forum as well to the campus, I don't want that to be an unrealistic expectation as a district, because what happens is you continue to dig yourself deeper into a hole and play this game with stability, and we've got to have a stronger strategic plan on that. That's what accreditation has asked of us, and not just constantly playing shell games with that. So that's why we're making this assumption, to play on the safe side and to be realistic. We will build back up to the 10,000.
Thank you, President. So that actually segues well into the next point, which is even though the state has provided enrollment growth about 1%, we are not participating in that where we're at today. And then finally, the EPA, we're estimating that about 7.6 million for us this year. So you can kind of see kind of in broad strokes, and you can probably only see in color as the numbers are so small I can't even read them. But essentially, where our largest factor, you can see the big blue bar there, is our apportionment, which makes up the majority of where we receive our funding. The next is property taxes, our EPA component, and then the green is our enrollment fees, and then finally general lottery. Those are major components what make up where we receive our funding for. So any one of those, if there's a slide in any one of those, they have a major impact to sort of our funding and our operation. So where we're placing us for tentative for 18-19 this year is about $62.5 million. You can kind of see how that spreads through the various different types of funding. Our assumptions for our expenditures. So the district expects to exceed the fall full-time faculty FON again this year. That's 179.7. This represents the projected FON and will be subject to change. Of course, that happens at the state level. Adjustments to step and column for this year are estimated at about $521,000. And you can see all the various different rate components based on rate changes that we're receiving. Significantly, you can see PERS and STIRS. Those rates have increased, both of those have, and just for the increase of the components, $238,000 and in STIRS, $383,000. So quite a bit of increase, and that's purely just based on the rate changes that we're receiving. The district did build in some projected salary savings of about $700,000 and benefit savings of $600,000. Those are just based on timing for positions that we know that won't start, or those that may not be filled in the beginning of the year. And so those built in are to take advantage of those timing of savings as we move forward. So our tentative budget expenditure projections as we lie right now is at $62.2 million. And you can see in the various different categories and where those projections align. Obviously, our largest component of expenditures really is our human capital. And those numbers are also reflected in our submission for budget. Tentative reserve assumption. So provides the board reserve, we continue to maintain the 6% of the anticipated expenditures at $3.7 million. Our 2017-18 ending balance projected is at 4.8 million, or at 8%. And this projection will continue to change again, as VP Allison said, depending on as we move forward and what things will look as we close out the books. 17-18 ending balance was estimated at 5.1 million, or at 8.2% of our expenditures. And our tentative budget does not include, and VP Allison said this earlier, any planned expenditures or resource allocation at this point, or any augmentations that usually get included in our final budget. So where we'll be sitting as our proposal, our reserve will sit at, for our 6%, 3.7 million, our one-time expenditures carryover budget, which is available, and then our total projected ending balance at 5.1 million. And again, this does, let's see if I can, Stacy trained me right here. I think I have to stay here and go to the final budget. And this ultimately, another chart you can't see, but these tie back to our ultimate ending numbers here for what our projected budget is, for what you have before you. And so with that being said, any questions from the board?
So you will note that even though we are including the 1.3 million for the mid-sized college, the new formula and the base apportionment that we'll be receiving still allows us to operate in the black. And so it isn't as if, and that's why I felt comfortable presenting you all this budget, because we are able to, and thanks to these guys, create a balanced budget moving forward. We do have some great things to do this next year, some innovative projects. We're sitting at the table with both of the unions, and so there are several priorities that will begin to surface, but at this point the assumptions are we're not starting the year off that we're going to end up in the red, which is always a positive thing, and it has not always been the case. And so nice job, and thank you both for your work on getting this done. And this was presented to the budget committee, and they have reviewed these numbers as a team. And over the next week or two, we'll get more solidified numbers. And of course, you'll see this again in September, so for adoption.
Thank you very much. Any comments from the board?
I do have a comment and a question, if I may.
Please go.
So, I believe it was back in April at our board meeting, we did pass some resolutions that gave the governor's office and the state chancellor's office our opinion as far as the new funding formula. And I just want to say that I'm very proud that because we as a board, we did pass those resolutions. I see the result today, and I'm happy to see the wins that we got as a result from passing those resolutions. And my question is regarding local funding, specifically property taxes. Can you expand a little bit on how the district looks at that as far as real estate, having a big impact on real estate values, having a big impact on property taxes? We've been in an increasing market for many years now, since about 2012, and real estate markets do adjust. So there's going to come a point to where there, more than likely be a negative adjustment in values. So if you can, please expand on how the district takes a look at that in future projections.
The real estate is an interesting part of of the process because the state actually includes property taxes as part of their overall calculation. So currently, right now, the state estimates what the real estate values will be into their calculation for revenue. So we don't get any benefit for the rise in real estate, nor do we get any benefit or detriment, say to any balloon popping of the real estate market. Because what the state does is say, you're going to get X number of dollars. Where that comes from is going to be us, property tax, and then they estimate what that value of property tax is. So they go into their own economies and determine what property tax will be for our area. And they estimate what that value is, and they include that in that computation. So for instance, if there is a year in which we do see a high value of property tax that comes into the district, so all the state does is reduce the amount that comes from general apportionment relative to the increase in property tax that we receive. So it's an equalizer in the formula, we don't get any benefit from it, unfortunately. That being said, in the old days also, if there was a big balloon pop, as you remember back in 2006 or otherwise, where it would have gone, say, below what the state estimated was, we would have not been made up the difference. So say they estimated $10 million were coming in from property tax and we only got, say, 8, that $2 million shortfall, we would have seen that in our budget, unfortunately, because the state wouldn't have then come in and said, oh, we're going to make up the difference for where property tax did not come in. That's different than K-12, where they would have been shored up essentially for that shortfall. So in our system, though, that is not the case.
It could happen. It's just not a guarantee that we would receive that backfill for those property tax dollars that we didn't receive, and that's system wide. So it's not just specific to Merced College, but they look at it system wide. And then when Department of Finance overstates that, and knowing that we don't necessarily receive that backfill, or we're not guaranteed that, it becomes problematic, and we have to incorporate that into our assumptions as to, do we really think that we're going to reach that level of property taxes that they're estimating? And there were a couple of years that they pretty significantly overstated our property taxes, and so we have to adjust accordingly.
Joe, is that where the deficit factor comes in?
Yes, that's one of the components where a deficit factor comes in. If we know that the likelihood of us reaching those property tax levels, then that's where part of the assumption that I'm mentioning is whether or not we should include a deficit factor, meaning that even though the state says you're going to get this much money, we know that the likelihood of that occurring is pretty low. So we'll incorporate some level of deficit factor to reduce that number.
So it could be a 0.5% or a percentage point that we put in, almost like a placeholder, for this exact reason.
Yeah.
At this point, we have not budgeted a deficit factor for this upcoming fiscal year. All indications is that will be okay this next year. That is something we may need to entertain in the future, and we have in the past. So.
Thank you very much.
All right, any further comments from members of the board? Okay, well, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
And so this is an action item. What is the pleasure of the board at this time?
Move to approve.
Okay, we've got a motion to approve the 2018-2019 tentative budget. Motion by Trustee Gutierrez, second by Trustee Upton. Any discussion by members of the board? Okay, seeing none, I'll ask for any comments from the public. Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. Trustee Lemus, how do you vote? Aye. Thank you. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Agenda item G, the resolution determining the candidates paid for their statements in the November election. It's my understanding that this is just general housekeeping, but it is required that we make this resolution. What is the pleasure of this board?
I shall move to approve.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I have a motion by Trustee Gutierrez and a second by Trustee Lashbrook. Any discussion by members of the dais? Trustee Upton?
What about, Madera County? Is this the same thing in Madera County? Because I don't come to the state to be honest.
Okay, that's a good question. How do we handle, well, Los Baños is Merced County, but Madera and is not, does Madera require?
It's always been our past practice that this board has approved the resolution for Merced County Registrar voters. I think that's because that's where our primary residence is as a district. I don't believe that we have to do that for the small portion of Madera that falls into our service area north of Mariposa. That, to my knowledge. Stacy, do you know?
Madera County does not require this.
And the answer was that Madera County doesn't require this resolution. Thank you.
But what it's saying is, if we choose to put a statement into the election, then we can pay for it ourselves.
That's right.
We don't have to choose to.
And the college has never paid for that in the past, is that correct?
No.
Anything further? All right, thank you. I will, so again, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion from members of the board? Okay. Any comments from members of the public? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for the vote. Trustee Lemus, how do you vote? Aye. Thank you. Okay, motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Agenda item H, order of election. The Merced County Office of Education requires our district to act and submit the attached order of election in the years that we will have elections for trustee positions, which is this year. What is the pleasure of this board?
Move to approve.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion by Trustee Gutierrez, a second by Trustee Ochoa. Any discussion by members of the board?
So is this just kind of something we do every election? So every 2 years we have the list?
If we have someone running here.
Okay.
Any further comments or questions? Okay, seeing none. Any members of the public have comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. Trustee Lemus, how do you vote? Aye. Thank you. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Next on the agenda item H, resolution in recognition and support of Pride Month. There was 3 trustees and certainly President Kelly helped put this together. What is the pleasure of the board?
I move to adopt the resolution.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion by student trustee Lemus. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a second by trustee Flashbrook. Any discussion from members of the board? As a member of the board, I'll say that I really liked the tone and the strength and that it felt strong and positive. So appreciate everybody's hands that touched it. So any comments from members of the public? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for the vote. Trustee Lemus, how do you vote?
Aye.
Thank you. Oh, let's see.
I can't do the courthouse office.
Okay, all right. So it will be corrected to reflect the motion was made by Trustee Lemus, so that'll be corrected. Thank you. It'll be corrected in minutes. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Next on the board's agenda, agenda item J, reorganization of the instructional division, reduction of administration management positions. President Vitale?
Yes, thank you. I sent an email to you all last week and also posted this in board docs. This is a relatively minor reorg, but I wanted to bring it to the board this month because there are several gaps that we have to fill with the resignation of Dr. Connor. She's going to the growing Madera Center as a Dean of Instruction there. And we were able to take some temporary stopgaps in fulfilling the needs, including reaching out to Delhi and others in the last couple of weeks. In fact, Jessica Moran is with us here today in the back. Big wave, Jessica. And she's been a part of that solution as an acting director of adult education and doing a fantastic job in that regard. But there's also been an undertone for the last several years that there may be some opportunities for reduction in administration. So this was an opportunity to look at how we're doing business and to reallocate some of those duties. I've met with the dean team, if you will, and reallocated some of those duties to existing deans. I have met with the constituent leaders and also notified the campus of this change. So I'd like to move forward. We have several items of business to get completed over the summer, including the VPIs coming on board, and so this will allow her to hit the ground running and will allow us to reduce the impact to our overall budget but maintain the quality of programs for our students. So it's my recommendation that you approve.
Okay.
I move that we approve.
Okay, we have a motion by Trustee Jordan and second by Trustee Upton. Is there any discussion by members of the dais on this issue?
Just with the change like this, I guess, where that one dean was probably linking some things together and now we're separating them out. I'm just hoping there's plans to make sure their connections are maybe even stronger.
Yeah, that's a good question. Every week, the Vice President of Instruction meets with all the deans, and we also, once a month, include the Student Services deans as a part of that. And I know it's both a goal and a plan of both Dr. McCandless and VP Fowler when she comes in to do more of that. And I can say that even the last few weeks, the work that Jessica's been able to do, and then the dean's already set at the table, it's just a matter of open communication, making sure that information is dispersed appropriately. I was very purposeful in making sure that whoever took on a role, it connected to their area or division. And I think there'll be a lot of synergy with this. And when VP Fowler comes on board, she'll be able to assess as well and make sure that that's the case. So, yeah.
Thank you. Any further discussions by members of the board? Seeing none, any questions or comments from members of the public? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for the vote. Trustee Lemus, how do you vote?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Now, agenda item K, authorization to award RFP 2018-02 for exclusive beverage service rights.
Yeah, sometimes we don't know what a buzz on campus will be when you put an item on, but I would say that this one has gotten quite a bit of attention, and I'm going to ask VP Allison to give us just a brief background on the RFP process and to explain the direction we're headed. But if you want to get someone's attention, you ask them, do you like Pepsi or Coca-Cola? So VP Allison, did you ever think during a board meeting we'd be talking about Coca-Cola products?
Not for 1 second, but here we are. And so we have an existing contract with Coca-Cola that expires on June 30th. And so in preparation of that, we went out, put out an RFP, and surprisingly, we only received 2 responses, Coca-Cola and Pepsi. And so we have put a committee together that was consisted of administrative services, athletics, the president's office, as well as student services. And so they reviewed the proposals from both companies, and Pepsi was the clear front runner. And so we're bringing this to you this evening, to propose that we move forward with Pepsi for a 5-year agreement.
Were they the front runner on taste?
I can say this objectively. I could have either one, so I really don't have a preference. I can drink a Coke and a Pepsi. So
it's according to what you mix in it. That's your
You can't have rum and Pepsi, you gotta be rum and Coke. Okay, aside, so the contract was better with Pepsi versus with Coke?
Yes.
And all those figures at the end of the contract, that's what they would be contributing to the college?
Exactly. Yes.
That's
really
important.
And it's my understanding that was the key, is that with Pepsi, there was more money coming back to the college, and it had less to do with taste and more to have to do with which one provided a better financial incentive to the college.
From my perspective, definitely the financial perspective, yes.
That's all Joe cares about. So, yeah.
Full disclosure, I like Pepsi, so
Yes.
I intend to support this.
So, and one other question, so though that funding provided by Pepsi, would that go directly to, is there a certain department, is it to athletics or to academics, how is that going to be distributed?
We typically put it in our capital projects fund, and those funds they're entirely unrestricted, and so we typically try to use them towards athletics, and so, which makes Mike happy. And so typically when an issue comes up where items are needed for athletics, Mike and I typically consult with each other to determine whether or not the beverage funds would be a good source of funds for that particular item.
We had a lot of improvements in the athletic arena, in signs and improvements to the football field and all that.
Yes.
Perhaps we can utilize some of this funding for a soccer program.
Ooh, that's
all I gotta say.
And there's maybe the 10,000 enrollment number that we were trying to get from Pepsi.
VP Allison Trustee Gutierrez took the words right out of my mouth, so thank you very much for that. And I was, wondering in the past, did our previous provider not offer any sponsorship opportunities or support towards our athletic programs?
Yes, it did. Yeah, we've gotten similar amounts each year. As you can imagine, if the athletic program was here right now, they would tell you that they are very underfunded on the general fund side. So this money goes towards basically every 3 or 4 years, one existing program gets an update on equipment, which is very expensive. We've been able to do some projects with it for athletics, but as you all know, athletics is very expensive. And so even buying, new helmets for a football program can soak up quite a bit. And so we divvy this out and prioritize, but yeah, we've been getting dollars from Coca-Cola, and that money primarily has been used to offset the expense from the general fund because we don't give them enough to operate. Even getting their teams to events, if they make a tournament or something, because the general fund doesn't fully support it, they fundraise. We give them general funds, and then we use Coca-Cola funds to offset that. This will also do that. The difference is they're giving us a few extra dollars for some other projects that they weren't in the past. And so this will continue to support the athletic program, provides a scholarship, but you'll also see that it embeds some funding for the new kickoff barbecue carnival that we started last year, which was a huge success. Almost 500 of our employees and their families came out. It was very well received. This provides some embedded ongoing funding for that as well.
Would it provide funding to have a dummy at the dunk tank instead of us?
No comment.
So my concern would be for the funding that we are switching over to Pepsi since ASFC and their clubs are mostly the ones that do purchase a lot of Pepsi products. What would be is there any, if so, what would be kind of like how we have the carnival for the athletics? What would be the benefit in a sense for ASFC or students in general?
Is it a carnival?
No, it's a carnival for the entire campus.
Yeah, it's for.
Yeah, for all the employees for campus. Yeah. It's the kickoff to the year. You know, that's a good question, but it's not just the students who are purchasing it, it's employees. We have tons of events. They have exclusive rights to all events on campus. And you all as students, yes, you purchase the products, but it also goes back into operations, the vending machines, everything that we have on campus to help maintain that. And so, you know, I'd venture to say the students do get quite a bit of benefit from dollars that go back, including all the students who are athletes. They get quite a bit of funding to help support their extracurricular activities. But good question.
Anything further from members of the board? Okay. What is the pleasure of the board?
I move with great delight as a longtime Pepsi consumer that we approve.
Okay, we have a motion by Trustee Jordan, the Pepsi consumer, and
They're going to
second
think
by
that only old
Trustee
people
Upton.
drink Pepsi.
Mine's based on Dr. Pepper.
So we have a motion by Trustee Jordan, second by Trustee Upton. Any further discussion from members of the board?
We just got to get used to not, I'll be careful not to say, well, let's use some Coke monies. Pepsi monies now.
Okay, any discussion from members of the public? All right, seeing none, I'll call for the vote. Trustee Lemus, how do you vote?
I as a Pepsi consumer, it's not just elderly, but the young too.
All right, thank you.
As a note to the board, we are looking into it, looking into the delay of this. So they're working on seeing why the system's taking so long. So we'll figure this out.
Maybe we're getting hacked by Coca-Cola. Slowing us down. Okay, all right. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Next item on our agenda, the CCAP partnership with Merced Union High School District.
This is a second reading. As you know by now that this is part of the law, that you have to approve it so we can provide these courses that have become wildly popular, by the way, within our district, and we're expanding rapidly. So we recommend that you approve.
Okay, thank you very much. What is the pleasure of the board?
I move to approve.
Okay.
I'll second.
Okay, motion by Trustee Ochoa, second by Trustee Lashbrook. Any comments from members of the board? Okay, any comments from members of the public? All right, seeing none, I'll call for the vote. Trustee Lemus, how do you vote?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Agenda item M, appointment of Associate Vice President of Human Resources, President Vitelli.
Yes, it's my pleasure to recommend for appointment Kelly Underwood for the position of Associate Vice President of Human Resources at a range of AVP Step 6 at $150,207, starting July 2nd. Kelly is currently a Chief Human Resources Officer at Allen Hancock and was up here this past week, and that's why she didn't make another trip up. It was difficult finishing up her task at her current location, but she has quite a bit of experience, as you can see, as a Chief Human Resources Officer, Chief Negotiator, has actually been a member of CSEA as well as a president, and very impressive. Will be a wonderful addition to our executive team, and look forward to introducing you all to her, and I recommend that you approve.
Thank you very much. What is the pleasure of the board?
I move that we approve this appointment.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Okay, we have a motion by Trustee Jordan, a second by Trustee Gutierrez. Any discussion on this item from members of the board?
I would like to ask our president to briefly give information on how an associate vice president relates to the vice presidential level.
This is a range that's been on the books for a while. I don't remember, well, I do actually. The last time we had an associate VP is when they split the, temporarily, the vice president of technology and institutional research for a while. They had an AVP on both sides. And so this is just one step on the classification, lower than a vice president, but will still sit at cabinet. It elevates the role quite a bit. And a lot of districts have vice presidents. For our district and our size, I thought it was more appropriate to have an associate vice president, and so we'll still maintain the executive level position, just not at the same range as a VP.
And does this person attend cabinet meetings?
That's correct, yes. And we'll also be sitting with the VPs at board meetings.
As a lawyer, I know the importance of HR. It's a section that's a trap for the unwary. It really is a lot of exposure, so I'm glad that we're getting somebody that you have a lot of confidence in. All right, any further comments from members of the board? Any comments from members of the public? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. Trustee Lemus, how do you vote? Aye. Thank you. Motion carries. Thank you.